I really like Primaris Space Marines. I really like bigger, stronger, sexier Space Marines, and I feel like Games Workshop has been absolutely crushing it with the new Space Marine models. You guys, I've bought so many Terminators. But there's one new Space Marine kit. Well, it's the Desolators. What is there to say about these guys? I mean, they're so bad. They're so bad. They have Nerf gun, Super Soaker Hasbro missile launchers. They're wearing normal Primaris Intercessor armor. They're just kind of a mess. But with that said, they are missile launcher Space Marines, and I do want them. And so I want to see, can I make these not only look good, but can I make them look good as Black Templars? It felt kind of bad pulling the trigger on this box, paying good money for models I don't really like, but I've been down this road before, and it's just an opportunity for greatness. Just imagine these Marines walking, or rather waddling around with these oversized guns. There are a number of weapon options: a larger anti-vehicle rocket, smaller anti-infantry rockets, and for the captain, a great big rocket. It's going to be really hard to get this kit where I'd like it to be, but it does come with a nice transfer sheet. I would like to give Games Workshop some kudos for the new excellent Space Marine Infantry transfer sheet. This is much better than for like 2 years, Games Workshop's only putting in like a little quarter sheet of Ultramarine decals. So having the Imperial Fist Salamanders and for some reason the Raptors is a nice touch. Now they just need to make a sheet that comes with White Scars, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard, and then we will have perfect Space Marine boxes. Although these guys are far from a perfect Space Marine box. Each Desolation Marine is just a bog standard intercessor, which is normal-ish. Space Marines are masters of every type of combat, so on their way to a battle they just pick up whatever weapon is best suited for that particular engagement. But I would have liked to see something a little different. Maybe some more chunky feet or a robot arm to help hold up that humongous gun. The base of their gun is essentially a Nerf long strike, with a small circular rocket pod in the front and a belt that somehow feeds the rockets into the back and somehow pushes them forward into the tubes. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and then on top either the 4 little rocket pods or the 2 big ones. And when it's all put together, it's actually bigger than the Space Marine, which makes it look dumb. This is gonna be really hard. These missile launcher guns are very specific, and I don't like the idea of a missile launcher gun. It makes no sense. The reason a missile launcher is on your shoulder is because that exhaust needs to go somewhere. And that exhaust is coming out at the exact same velocity as the missile leaving the tube. So it doesn't make sense for all that energy to go right into a Space Marine's shoulder. I'm sure their armor can handle it, but why make it that hard on yourself? I think step 1 is actually going to be building the bases before I get all of these guns posed, because I don't like it when I get that perfect pose, and then when I go to glue a guy to a base, he's all of a sudden slightly off kilter. Over the last 10 years, I have perfected my Black Templar bases. Just a nice simple yellow cliff. I started by gluing down pieces of bark and then adding some cork to fill in some of the space around the bark. The bark is there to look really good and the cork is there to add some height. Then Milliput, a 2-part epoxy. I squished it into the base with a lot of force to get it into all the cracks. Then I take a piece of cork and press it into the putty, which leaves behind a realistic rock texture, blending all 3 elements together. Then a good amount of super glue on the Space Marine's huge feet. I used to pin every model, but I think it's overkill. Space Marines have big feet, and you know what that means. That's right, really good connections for glue points. I added some more cork to make sure that there was something under all the feet, and now the bases are done, I know exactly where these guns should go. And speaking of those guns, I started to cut them all in half, getting the rocket pod out from underneath. I cleaned it up and glued on the little front cap. I don't know what I'll be doing with this yet, but I know I don't want it on the gun. I'm thinking now that I have this big long empty space, I can fill it with the missile and it'll actually look like there's a reason for this design. I cut the rocket canister in half and made the front little door match. Now that I have a single pod, it actually fits well under the gun and looks like he could reasonably carry it. I was tempted to turn a couple of these into the small rocket pods. I think I would cut the little ones in half and glue all 4 of them underneath. But if there's one thing I know my Black Templar army doesn't need more of, it's anti-infantry shooting. I'm going anti-vehicle all the way with 4 shots of super crack rocket launchers. I guess you could call them crackheads. Okay, I think I've got this figured out. 1 rocket pod per gun looks okay. It definitely looks a lot better than 2 to 4 with a belt-fed mini missile launcher. 1 looks believable. It's got the little exhaust port on the side, which I would think would maybe knock their aim off a little bit, but I guess Space Marines can handle the recoil, and the rocket pod door opens to the side instead of directly in front of their face, blocking their view of what they're aiming at. So I can live with this. Once I had my guns glued, I needed to get the hand to fit, and luckily, Games Workshop made the left hand separate, so I can cut off the fingers and glue them onto the bottom. Now they fit perfectly, but if somebody looks underneath, they might notice a little bit of a gap, but I know my secret's safe with you guys. The captain is holding up the mother of all rocket launchers. This thing is huge and looks ridiculous just held up by the pistol grip. I cut off this massive Vengor rocket launcher and attached it just like the other rockets. It's silly, but I guess slightly less silly now. Yeah, I like these missile launchers now. The way I've got it is the gun is really more of just a trigger, and they take these rocket pods, stick them to the bottom, fire them off, and then they just toss them. Kind of like the M203 grenade launcher. Ooh, or no wait, better example, the Nerf Modulus Tri-Strike Blasters rocket launcher. I got the Sergeant's Vengor launcher and the rest of the guys' Super Crack launchers all done. And of course, because they're Space Marines, they don't just have one missile launcher apiece, they have two. I gotta figure out how to get the Castellan launchers back on there. These little launchers are the indirect fire weapon on these fellas, and I have an idea of how to get them back on. The Desolation Marine backpacks have little cameras that swivel on stocks, and these end up being super tall, the perfect place for another weapon. I really like these cameras and I'll have to use these bits somewhere else, but for now, I just need those sticks. I glued them into position and then used my hobby drill to make a dent. Then I plastic glued them into place, and now I have some missile launchers that I feel like look even better because presumably the normal missiles fire direct fire, and these little pods shoot up in the air to get around buildings and obstacles to rain down some strength 4 shots. I rated my bit spin for a bunch of Devastator Marine heads. These have a lot of lenses and extra doodads that I don't like on my normal Space Marines, but they feel appropriate for these Desolation Space Marines. Then for some shoulder pads and sand over the bases. I do sand last because handling them tends to knock off some sand if I'm not careful. Then a few decorations that I thought of something to do with those cameras. I shaved off some of the Picatinny rail and glued the camera back onto a few of them. Might as well have something on that 3 feet of rail. I think these guys are no longer compensator Space Marines, they are proper Desolation Marines. Which, not to say that I like the Primaris naming conventions, but it's weird that these are the Desolation Marines when I'm so used to the or suffix. Aggressors, intercessors, dinosaurs. That's what I have come to know the Primaris as, but it is time for paint. I primed my Black Templar black and then zenithal them with a white. And now for my Templar recipe. Some Lamian medium, Black Templar contrast paint, and Leviathan blue. Mix these 3 colors together and you get a lovely dark color that is a one-shot solution to black armor. After the armor was blacked, I put Nuln Oil over the Imperialis and then Rattling Grime over the guns. And you know what else always looks good with Nuln Oil and Rattling Grime? That's right, our Patreon. We have monthly terrain packs. This month it's the Plasma Pipes, a totally tubular set of power pipes, plants, generators, and roboskeleton workers. With magnet slots, this energetic set of terrain is ready to crisscross a battlefield. And if you always want to be up to date on the goings on at Eons of Battle and be entered into our monthly giveaways, this month we're picking 3 followers to receive this month's terrain. Follow the link in the description to sign up to our newsletter. I've been painting my Templar guns with yellow. It makes them feel a lot more John Blanchian, and it draws a lot of attention right where I want it. I started with some yellow contrast paint and then Cadian flesh tone on top. This adds a lot more warmth to the yellow, and then some Fugen orange made for intensely saturated orange shadows. Then some highlights with the desaturated yellow paint, which I applied really aggressively, but eventually I toned it down, and then for some red hot rod flames. What is more appropriate than red flames on the missile launchers? And with such big plain shapes, it was easy. I picked out the little missiles with red too. Then a dry brushing of silver over the Rattling Grime. With the yellow, the guns were looking very gunny. Desolation Marines have been on kind of a roller coaster ride in Warhammer 40k 10th edition. At launch, they were an auto-include unit at 240 points for a squad of 10 of these guys, which was incredibly efficient. And you would always buy them an upgrade character like Gilliman, a lieutenant, or a captain to make them even better. Games Workshop noticed this, and so with the first errata, they increased the points cost to 170 points for 5, and they capped a max squad at 5, so you can no longer bring squads of 10. And this nerf worked okay, but with the launch of Codex Space Marines, they increased the points cost again to 200 points for 5, which is hilariously almost a 100% points increase. And what's also kind of funny is that they're still pretty darn good, with really good anti-infantry or anti-vehicle depending on which loadout you give them. I've given my guys anti-vehicle because my army is severely lacking in good anti-armor, and the guns are now done. So now I have to make them look like proper Black Templars. My Templar have been crusading against Nyx Blue Orcs for hundreds of years now, and their crisp white shoulder pads have turned a brown tinge. Then I cleaned it up with the airbrush and some white ink, and then prepped for some decals. On some shoulders, I traced the edge with Agrex's Earthshade, and on others, I painted a red stripe around the rim. And speaking of rim, the rim gets red too. And once I had my red on there, to bump up the color saturation, I used white to create a highlight, and glazed red over top, which gives me an ultra vibrant pink that tricks the eye into looking red. And some shoulder pads got gold. Because my Templar armor recipe is so simple, I can really splash out on the shoulder pads. I mixed some random numbers onto the Desolation Marines. I guess these guys are the 7th something. And then gave each one a Templar symbol.
Applying decals to round surfaces is tricky. I find crushing them down with a damp paper towel squeezes out the water from underneath perfectly. Now that basically all the arms and armor is done, I can do some paint chipping, sponging on a bright silver.
It's always such a rush once I got the decals and the chipping done on my Black Templar, because it means I'm just about done. I just need to frost the cake. I need to write happy birthday and put on icing flowers. And of course that means purity seals and pouches.
For purity seals, I like to keep the paper nice and simple. I cleaned up any mistakes I made with the contrast paint and then applied skeleton horde over them. Now for the wax. Because red is already an accent color for my Templar, I like to highlight the wax seals all the way up to pink, mixing in more and more white into my red and then glazing over these extreme highlights with red. Then for the pouches, they get a similar treatment, some contrast paint and some highlighting with a tan color. Now for my Crusade symbol, a red and bone checker on the knee of my Marines. The Black Templar are medieval, and this is a nice way of showing that. And speaking of more medieval, I painted the Templar cross right over their faces. This is doable on the Primaris helmet, but I also got it to work on the Beaky helmet as well. Then a watery earth color over the base and a dry brushing of tan, and these models are ready to join the Crusade. But I don't know exactly how they will fit in yet. At 200 points, they're a large investment. I could see them working very well in a Vanguard Spearhead, where they can get pseudo-stealth outside of 12 inches, and can guerrilla tactics back into strategic reserve, or they can walk back on and get a guaranteed sweet turn of direct shooting. What do you guys think? Did I save the Desolation Marines, or are they still a rough Space Marine unit? I like them, although they're not my favorite special Space Marine. I'm heavily biased though, I would give it to the Crusader squad. I love these stabby boys.